Hey composters. So you're probably asking yourself one of the most important questions. When do you feed your worms and how much do you feed your worms? And it's not a super easy answer. The answer is it depends. But this is where you're gonna just have to get familiar with, how much your worms are eating and just kind of pay attention that way. You're also gonna have to get a little bit comfortable with maybe digging around in your bin just a little bit and actually see what's going on. Get a spoon and start flipping over some of the layers and just see what's happening. Now, I do have a whole container here of veggies that are all chopped up and everything and ready to feed them. But before I do that, I'm gonna go and just kind of look around in both of my bins and just see what's actually taking place and if it's gonna be the right thing for me to add this. Because we need to keep in mind that if we add too much food, if we're just constantly throwing food in there and it just keeps going and going before those worms are actually consuming it, you're going to end up with things rotting and not getting consumed right away, which is going to cause things to get funky and stinky. The more vegetables that you add as well is going to release a whole bunch of extra moisture. So you would need to be combating that with adding lots of browns to soak up that extra moisture. But sometimes it just gets too far. The worms haven't had the chance to consume, and that's when your bin gets out of balance. If you fall outside that 2/3 browns to 1/3 greens before the worms can get to it, you're gonna just end up with things getting funky. And both of my bins currently are inside the house. I don't want funky, stinky things anywhere in my house. So I'm gonna have a look at and see. My senses are telling me that this is gonna probably have to go into my outside bin, my regular compost bin, and that right now I'm not gonna be able to put this into my vermicompost bin because I just did a big meal prep not too long ago, maybe about 4 or 5 days ago, and I put a decent amount of food. I evenly sort of divided it between both of my bins. So my suspicions are, because a lot of it was fresh veggies when I added it, and when fresh veggies, when they're still hard and they're still essentially like fresh, the worms don't actually care for it then. They like it to just break down and get a little mushy and a little bit gross before they consume it. So chances are there's gonna still be a bit of fresh stuff. Some of it will have started to go off and they'll have started to consume that. But that's a little bit of the process that we need to think about as well. So a lot of this is, again, really, really fresh. And the more fibrous that it is, the longer it takes to get to that soft, squishy state for them to actually consume it. So you'll see things like, an avocado, that creaminess inside, they love that. Eggplant, love that. Watermelon, anything that has that really soft, squishy texture, they will just go crazy for it like instantly. But anything that is, say, like the skin of an avocado, that's gonna take a lot longer for them to be able to consume that. Or I've got some ends of asparagus in here. That would take them a fair bit of time. Or stems of broccoli or cabbage, cauliflower, things that are a little more fibrous, that takes longer yet. So you can kind of gauge based on what you're putting in there, the time frame. If you're putting really fibrous things, it's gonna take them longer as well. But at the end of the day, it's just gonna come down to you actually looking in the bin, get a spoon, start flipping over some layers and just see what's happening. So I'll show you in my one main bin here, and I'll share with you what I decide and whether this is gonna go into my vermicompost bin or whether I'm gonna be sending it out into my regular compost. All right, so having a look in here, so I always put a layer of paper on top of the food that I put in. So I can see a few random lettuce things that I've thrown in here. So if I start to move, I can see, if I move away that top layer of paper, I can still see, a pretty good solid layer of like still whole pieces. There's sweet potatoes, some other avocados. So there's still a pretty good solid layer. You can see the pepper is still mostly whole here. I've got some more lettuce. So some of this stuff is starting to get squishy and I can see the worms here, but overall that's still quite a bit of fresh. So I'm gonna leave this. I'm not gonna add anything else to this. I wanna make sure that the majority, like probably 80% of everything that's in here is all broken down. So just to give you an idea of what that might look like, so if I were to peel away a lot of this fresh stuff on top, you can actually see they're still kind of working their way underneath. But the further that I go, you can start to see it starts to get to be quite brown. That's all their worm casting. So when you see it start to look kind of nice and dark brown like that, and you're only seeing little bits of food, then you know, then you can add more. But in this case, there's a lot of fresh food still in here, so I'm just gonna leave it. I don't want things to get wacky and out of balance. Like right now, even though there's lots of fresh food still in here, I have put a pretty significant amount of paper. It doesn't stink, it's not like funky or anything like that, just me sitting over it right now. But if I were to keep throwing more fresh in here and just keep building before these guys make a good job of this, it will start to get stinky. So this is gonna be good. I'm just gonna tuck these guys back in, put all the little layer of paper back on top, spread the food around. And these guys are gonna go for a while yet. Being as there's a fair bit in here, as I said more than a few days ago, maybe about 4 or 5 days ago, I put a decent helping of stuff in here. I would say it's probably gonna be a good solid week even before they start to make good headway and before I'd wanna consider more stuff. So that's potentially 2 weeks between the feeding that all of this is from, and then another week, yet before I'm comfortable putting more in it. So this gives you an idea. That's lots of fresh food. This is just gonna sit for a little while. But if you see that most of it's consumed, lots of castings, little bits of food, then you can start to introduce. The more worms you get, the more developed your system is, the faster that they will go through it. Also, the smaller that you put the pieces, like these I just chucked the whole ends in here, but really you should actually chop those up. But lettuce tends to break down fairly quickly. So the smaller that you put things in here, the faster that it gets rotten and it breaks down and the worms can get to it as well. So teeny tiny chopping of your vegetables is a really good idea as well.